Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everybody.
Now then, Dennis, what to tell our listeners this week? Well, the Online Safety, Energy and Economic Crime Bill is bouncing between the two houses at the moment, whilst the Lords are very nearly finished with their amendments on the Levelling Up Bill. And I, for one, am particularly interested to see how the Commons reacts to those. Elsewhere, of course, the situation in Birmingham continues to dominate, and it seems to me that a large amount of alarm is being raised in the press regarding equal pay claims. What can you tell us, Dennis?
Helen, equal pay claims have haunted local government for around 20 years, and it's just been reported that it's going to cost billions. UK councils face huge bills over these equal pay claims, so here's more on this. Campaigners, including trades unions, say councils in the UK are facing compensation bills running into billions of pounds over equal pay claims. Unions have called on the government to intervene. The GMB union is supporting more than 3,000 equal pay claims against Birmingham City Council and has disputes against councils in Coventry, Westmorland, Cumberland, Glasgow, Dundee and Fife. They're gathering evidence in at least 20 other councils and have said everywhere where we're looking, we're finding issues. GMB organiser Ria Wolfson said councils need to learn from Birmingham. There are bad pay practices everywhere. And Wolfson went on, the problem is huge and there needs to be a conversation with central government about how they're going to deal with it, because leaving it up to local authorities is not a sustainable answer. This is going to cost billions, many billions, she said. Birmingham City Council said its current estimated equal pay liability is between £650 and £760 million, although it may be far higher. It was a central reason why the council was forced to issue a Section 114 notice last week, in effect declaring itself bankrupt. The problem runs back to the 2000s, when a number of equal pay claims were lodged against the council, including a case involving 4,000 female Birmingham City Council workers across 49 different jobs, who argued that they were excluded from bonuses paid to those in traditionally male-dominated jobs such as refuse collectors and road workers. Then, in 2012, more than 170 former City Council employees, including cooks, cleaners, catering and care staff, won an equal pay compensation fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The result was that women could have their equal pay claims heard in the county court, where there is a 6-year deadline from when employment ceased, as opposed to an employment tribunal where the deadline is just 6 months. Birmingham City Council also said that a judge-led inquiry should be commissioned to determine the causes of how its equal pay liability has continued to grow since 2012. Helen.
Well, many local authorities did settle their pay claims years ago, but it would be a very good idea for all concerned to take a look at your record keeping for all posts, whilst 151 officers should, of course, pay attention to what's coming out of SIPFA. Now, from one potential crisis to another definite one, whilst the issue of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC, has centred on the impact on schools, as we know, it's not just school buildings so affected. Public buildings in all sectors are at risk, and social housing is amongst them. Now, the regulator of social housing has written to all registered providers in England to advise that whilst RAC is not widespread in social housing, it, quote, may be present in a small number of buildings dating from this period, particularly in flat roof and panelled structures. There then followed a firm list of expectations from the regulator, including proportionate mitigation and remediation plans, and advised that any suggestion of material which might be non-compliant should be reported to the regulatory contact for your local authority. Sticking with social housing, the government have published guidance on understanding and addressing the health risks of damp and mould in the home. The guidance is a direct response to the coroner's report into the tragic death of 2-year-old Awab Ishaq in 2020 due to mould in his family home. The guidance states that when a tenant or another professional notifies a landlord that there is damp and mould in a property, it is crucial that the landlord takes the concern seriously, assesses the issue with urgency to identify its severity, and ensures that they always identify and tackle the underlying causes promptly and with urgency when concerns have been raised about tenant health. Tenants should be informed about what is being done to resolve the issue and what the likely timescales for the work will be. Now, Dennis, I mentioned the Levelling Up Bill in the Lords in my introduction, and of course, as things stand, that's the last bastion, as I see it, for the frankly small chance, or so it seems at the moment, to actually get some sort of remote provision for local authorities. But that's not the only concern, is it?
Well, the Levelling Up Bill seems to have been around for years. Controversial provisions continue to attract much criticism. Here's more on this. The LGA has voiced deep concern about intervention powers the government intends to hand to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. It said in a briefing for the House of Lords report stage of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill that it was deeply concerned that the proposed risk mitigation measures in Clause 74 of the bill potentially give the Secretary of State significant powers to intervene in a local authority. The LGA felt that the bill took a formula-based approach to intervention rather than examining individual circumstances that could affect councils more widely than intended. It is vital that the government undertakes full engagement with the sector, the LGA said, including full consultation before enacting the regulations arising from the bill. It last month argued that Whitehall should take a transparent, consistent, timely and proportionate approach to dealing with the small number of councils at risk of not meeting their best value duty. The association said that when significant issues of concern arose at a council, it will always be essential to enter into dialogue, with no preconceptions, with that council's leadership, both political and managerial, to understand the local context and risk, the level of self-awareness and ownership of the challenge, and current direction of travel before proceeding with any form of intervention. The LGA said advice from local authorities could assist the government to preserve the concept of prudential borrowing while ensuring the new arrangements address genuine government concerns about the indebtedness of some councils after borrowing to invest. Do you have issues with the new bill? Let us know via the LLG website.
Staying with Levelling Up, and in a particular a focus on exempt accommodation next, the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee identified in a report published back in October 2022 that exempt accommodation was, quote, a complete mess. And in fact, they had found evidence of exploitation of vulnerable people and landlords who were making excessive profits from high rents paid. This is a research brief pulled together for the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act 2023 debate in Parliament and produced by my favourite House of Commons library, which states that exempt accommodation is a type of supported housing where certain housing benefit provisions, which limit claimants' entitlement to defined local levels, do not apply. This means housing benefit may cover the full amount of rent charged by providers. It's defined as a resettlement place or accommodation provided by a county council, housing association, registered charity or voluntary organisation where that body or person acting on their behalf provides the claimant with care, support or supervision. The exempt system was an acknowledgement that the costs of managing shared supported housing. So what are the issues? Well, there are concerns that the sector is under-regulated. According to Crisis, growth of exempt provision is associated with investors looking to maximise returns using the higher rents permitted by the exempt housing benefit provisions. It's argued that some providers are putting profit before the needs of residents, resulting in poor housing conditions and ineffective care and support for vulnerable residents. Now, the Act came into force on the 29th of August this year and requires local authorities in England to review supported housing in their areas and develop strategies. It provides for the creation of a national expert advisory panel to advise on matters related to supported housing and gives the Secretary of State power to introduce national support standards. Finally, it gives local authorities power to create local licensing schemes for exempt accommodation. Now, moving on, barely does a podcast go by without the mention of information governance, Dennis. So come on, rustle us up something on the Freedom of Information Act, please.
Well, the received wisdom has usually been that FOI requests that seek information about what contractors pay staff can be defended under the defence of commercial sensitivity or the need to protect trade secrets. Well, here's a case where both the Ministry of Justice and the Information Commissioner both got it wrong. The first-tier tribunal has overturned a ruling that the Ministry of Justice was entitled to turn down Freedom of Information requests relating to the pay of cleaning staff. Southwark Law Centre, acting for the United Voices of the World Union, made the request to the MOJ in 2020, asking for details of pay awards to cleaners employed by a third party at the MOJ's HQ. The Ministry of Justice had refused outright to supply the information, saying this would prejudice the commercial interests of the third-party Facilities Management Company, OCS. A subsequent appeal to the Information Commissioner was also rejected, with the Commissioner accepting the MOJ's stance that disclosure would prejudice the effective conduct of public services by suppliers. The Commissioner concluded that it was important that there is a safe space for the MOJ to have a robust, confidential deliberation process on pay issues. But in the case of United Voices of the World against the Information Commissioner, the union's appeal was allowed, with the tribunal adding that elaborate arguments have been constructed by the MOJ and accepted by the Commissioner without any critical evaluation of the factual basis of those arguments by either party. Tribunal Judge Christopher Hughes concluded that the MOJ's arguments about prejudice to a company's commercial interests were problematic, making clear that the cost of the services contract should be in the public domain. The tribunal went on, there is frequently, in cases such as this, a claim that the basis upon which a contractor prices a contract is a trade secret, and that revealing it would be to expose that trade secret. However, in reality, the claim obscures an unwillingness to have information disclosed. The information withheld by the MOJ falls well below any reasonable test for what constitutes a trade secret. In the end, there was no convincing evidence before the tribunal that disclosure of the withheld information would cause detriment or a breach of confidence. Helen.
Interesting that it took an appeal in that case, Dennis, but good to have more case examples around the Section 36 exemption. Now, finally, for me, it was freedom of information requests on the planning front submitted by the Home Builders Federation, which suggested councils have about 567 million earmarked for affordable housing, 420 million in unspent educational contributions, and 384 million on unspent highways contributions from Section 106 funds. This has been reported in the Times, and of course is not a new topic of conversation. Back in 2019, the editorial Property Week were particularly verbose about CIL and 106 monies. Let's see what the infrastructure levy does to the sector, which incidentally the government states will prevent developers from negotiating down the amount they contribute to the community when they bring forward new projects. The technical consultation on the levy closed in June of this year. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 33, available on the LLG website now. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me too.